The Mojave Desert stretches endlessly under the scorching California sun, a vast expanse of Joshua trees and sand that has swallowed countless secrets over the decades. But none as haunting as the disappearance of Elena Vasquez, a 29-year-old painter from San Francisco, who vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be a 3-day artistic retreat in March 2016. 8 years later, the discovery of her burned canvases in a remote canyon would reignite a mystery that continues to baffle investigators and her family to this day. Elena Vasquez was not your typical struggling artist. Born in East LA to immigrant parents who had built a small but successful restaurant chain, she had graduated from the California College of the Arts with honors and had already begun making a name for herself in San Francisco's competitive art scene. Her paintings were known for their haunting desert landscapes, often featuring twisted Joshua trees and abandoned structures that seemed to tell stories of forgotten lives. Critics described her work as having an almost supernatural quality, as if she could see into the very soul of the American Southwest. Those who knew Elena described her as fiercely independent, almost obsessively dedicated to her craft. She would disappear for weeks at a time, driving her converted van deep into the desert to capture what she called the whispers of the land. Her apartment in the Mission District was filled with hundreds of sketches and half-finished canvases, all depicting the same recurring themes: isolation, endurance, and the strange beauty found in desolation. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Elena had been particularly excited about a new series she was working on. She had told her gallery owner, Marcus Chen, that she had discovered something extraordinary during her previous trips to the Mojave. She spoke of finding locations that seemed to exist outside of time, places where the light behaved differently and shadows fell in impossible directions. Marcus later recalled that Elena seemed almost manic in her enthusiasm, working 18-hour days and barely sleeping. The last person to see Elena alive was her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who watched from her window as the young artist loaded her van with supplies on the morning of March 15, 2016. The van, a 1995 Ford Econoline painted desert tan with small windows cut into the sides, had been Elena's mobile studio for 3 years. It was equipped with everything she needed: canvases, paints, a small camp stove, sleeping bag, and enough water and food for a week in the wilderness. Elena had told her parents she would be back by March 18th for her cousin's wedding. When she failed to show up and didn't answer her phone, the family immediately knew something was wrong. Elena was many things, but unreliable was not one of them. She had never missed a family gathering, and she always called to check in during her desert trips. The initial search effort was massive. San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department coordinated with California Highway Patrol, using helicopters and ground teams to scour the thousands of square miles where Elena might have gone. They found her van 3 days later, parked at a trailhead near Kelso Dunes, about 40 miles from the nearest paved road. The vehicle was unlocked, keys still in the ignition, with all her art supplies neatly organized in the back. Her wallet, phone, and identification were still inside, along with most of her food and water. What was missing was Elena herself, and strangely, about a dozen canvases that her family knew she had taken with her. The investigators found her easel set up about half a mile from the van, positioned to face a particular Joshua tree that stood alone on a small hill. Scattered around the easel were tubes of paint, some squeezed empty, and brushes that had been left to dry in the desert sun. But there was no sign of Elena, no indication of where she had gone or what had happened to her. The search continued for 2 weeks, involving over 100 volunteers from nearby communities. They found nothing: no clothing, no footprints leading away from the area, no signs of struggle or violence. It was as if Elena had simply vanished into the desert air. The case eventually went cold, classified as a missing person with no leads and no evidence of foul play. Elena's parents, Maria and Carlos Vasquez, never gave up hope. They hired private investigators, put up billboards along desert highways, and organized annual search parties. Maria would drive out to the Mojave every month, calling Elena's name into the wind and leaving fresh flowers at the spot where her easel had been found. The family offered a $50,000 reward for any information leading to Elena's whereabouts. But the leads that came in led nowhere. As the years passed, Elena's disappearance became something of a local legend. Desert hikers and rock climbers would occasionally report seeing a figure in the distance, painting at an easel, only to find nothing when they investigated. Some claimed to have heard music coming from empty canyons, the kind of haunting melodies Elena used to hum while she worked. These stories were dismissed as desert mirages and wishful thinking, but they kept Elena's memory alive in the communities that bordered the Mojave. The case took an unexpected turn in November 2023, nearly 8 years after Elena's disappearance. A group of geology students from UC Riverside were conducting field research in Amboy Crater, a remote volcanic formation about 60 miles from where Elena's van had been found. They were collecting rock samples when one of them, a graduate student named David Park, noticed something unusual in a narrow canyon that cut into the crater's eastern slope. Partially buried under years of windblown sand and debris were what appeared to be the remains of several paintings. David carefully excavated the site and found 12 canvas fragments, all severely burned but still recognizable as artwork. The paintings depicted desert scenes, but unlike any conventional landscape art, these images seemed to capture the desert in ways that defied explanation. Rock formations that appeared to be moving, shadows that fell upward, and skies that contained colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Most disturbing of all, several of the paintings seemed to show the same Joshua tree that had stood near Elena's easel, but rendered in different time periods. In one fragment, the tree appeared young and green. In another, it was gnarled and ancient. In a third, barely recognizable piece, the tree appeared to be on fire, its branches reaching toward a star-filled sky that contained 2 moons. David immediately contacted local authorities, who sent the fragments to the FBI's Art Crimes Unit for analysis. Within weeks, they had confirmed what everyone suspected. The canvases were painted with the same materials Elena had purchased before her disappearance, and microscopic analysis revealed paint residue that matched samples from her studio. These were Elena's missing paintings. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had the paintings ended up in Amboy Crater, so far from where Elena had disappeared? Who had burned them, and why? Most puzzling of all, how could the paintings depict scenes that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time? Detective Sarah Morrison, who had worked the original case and was now nearing retirement, reopened the investigation. She studied the fragments for hours, trying to understand what Elena had seen in those final days. The burned paintings suggested that Elena had witnessed something extraordinary, something that had compelled her to document what she was seeing, even as her situation became increasingly desperate. Morrison interviewed David Park extensively about the discovery site. The geology student described the canyon as one of the most isolated places he had ever been, accessible only by a treacherous climb down unstable volcanic rock. There was no obvious way Elena could have carried the paintings there, especially given their size and the fact that she had been on foot when she disappeared. The detective also noticed something strange about the burn patterns on the canvases. While most fire damage spreads irregularly, the burns on Elena's paintings were almost geometric in their precision, as if the flames had followed specific paths across each image. In several cases, only certain elements had been burned away, leaving other parts of the paintings completely intact. It was as if someone had deliberately chosen which parts of Elena's visions should be preserved and which should be destroyed. As Morrison delved deeper into the case, she began to notice patterns that had been overlooked in the original investigation. Elena's previous trips to the Mojave had followed specific routes, always ending at locations that shared certain characteristics. They were all geologically active areas, places where the Earth's crust was thin and underground. Thermal activity was high. They were also all sites of historical significance, places where Native American tribes had reported strange phenomena for generations. The detective reached out to Dr. James Littlefeather, a Mojave tribal elder and historian who had worked with law enforcement on previous cases involving missing persons in the desert. Dr. Littlefeather listened carefully as Morrison described Elena's paintings and their discovery site. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Your artist," he finally said. "She was painting the thin places, the spots where our world touches something else. My grandmother told stories about such places, warnings about what happens when someone looks too long into the spaces between." Dr. Littlefeather explained that Mojave oral tradition spoke of certain locations in the desert where time moved differently, where visions of past and future could bleed through into the present. These places were considered sacred and dangerous, to be approached only by those with proper spiritual preparation. Modern geological surveys had identified many of these locations as areas with high electromagnetic activity, places where the desert's mineral composition created natural phenomena that could affect human perception and electronic equipment. The old ones knew to leave offerings and prayers, Dr. Littlefeather continued. They knew to limit their time in such places. But someone who didn't understand the protocols, someone who stayed too long trying to capture what they were seeing, that person might become lost between worlds. Morrison was skeptical of supernatural explanations, but she couldn't ignore the fact that all of Elena's chosen painting locations corresponded to sites marked in tribal records as thin places. She also couldn't explain the technical aspects of Elena's disappearance, the lack of footprints, the undisturbed campsite, the impossible distance between her van and where the paintings were found. The investigation took another strange turn when Morrison decided to visit the exact spot where Elena's easel had been found. She arrived at sunset, the same time of day Elena had preferred for painting. As the detective stood looking at the solitary Joshua tree, she noticed something that had been missed in previous searches. The ground around the tree showed signs of unusual mineral deposits, crystalline formations that seemed to catch and bend light in unexpected ways. Morrison collected samples of the unusual minerals and sent them to a geology lab for analysis. The results were perplexing. The crystals contained elements that were commonly found in meteorites, suggesting they were extraterrestrial in origin. How these space minerals had ended up concentrated around a single Joshua tree in the middle of the Mojave was a mystery that added another layer to Elena's disappearance. As Morrison continued her investigation, she began to experience her own strange phenomena. During her visits to Elena's painting sites, she would occasionally see movement in her peripheral vision, only to find nothing when she turned to look. Her electronic equipment frequently malfunctioned in these locations, with compasses spinning wildly and GPS devices showing impossible coordinates. Most disturbing of all, she began to have vivid dreams about Elena, dreams in which the missing artist was still painting somewhere in the desert, working frantically to capture visions that were too important to lose. The case attracted national attention when Morrison published her findings in a law enforcement journal. Paranormal investigators, geologists, and artists from around the world traveled to the Mojave to study Elena's painting sites. Some claimed to experience the same phenomena Morrison had described, while others found nothing unusual about the locations. Among the visitors was Dr. Rachel Chen, a neuroscientist from Stanford who specialized in the study of altered consciousness states. Dr. Chen was intrigued by the possibility that certain geological formations might be capable of inducing hallucinations or other perceptual changes in human observers. She organized an expedition to map the electromagnetic fields around Elena's painting sites, using sensitive equipment to measure any anomalous activity. The results of Dr. Chen's study were fascinating and disturbing. Every location Elena had chosen to paint showed significant electromagnetic anomalies, with field strengths far exceeding normal background levels. More importantly, the frequency of these electromagnetic pulses corresponded to brainwave patterns associated with visionary states and temporal displacement experiences. In essence, Elena had been painting in locations that could naturally alter human consciousness, potentially allowing her to perceive events outside normal time and space. What Elena may have experienced, Dr. Chen explained in her report, was a form of natural consciousness expansion triggered by environmental factors. The electromagnetic fields at these locations could have induced states similar to those reported by mystics and visionaries throughout history. If she was particularly sensitive to these influences, she might have begun to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously. This scientific explanation provided a possible answer to one of the case's most puzzling aspects: how Elena's paintings could depict the same locations in different time periods. If she had indeed been experiencing temporal displacement, she might have been painting what she saw as past and future versions of the same scenes. But the scientific findings still didn't explain Elena's physical disappearance or how her paintings had ended up burned in a remote crater. Morrison continued to investigate these aspects of the case, focusing on the few concrete clues that remained: the specific burn patterns on the canvases, the unusual mineral deposits around the Joshua tree, and the precise timing of Elena's disappearance. A breakthrough came when Morrison decided to investigate the history of Amboy Crater, the location where Elena's paintings had been found. She discovered that the crater had been the site of numerous unexplained phenomena over the decades: hikers who reported losing time, electronic equipment that failed without explanation, and several other missing person cases that had never been solved. More significantly, Morrison found records indicating that Amboy Crater had been used as a testing site for experimental military technology in the 1950s and 1960s. Classified documents, only recently declassified under Freedom of Information Act requests, revealed that the military had conducted experiments with electromagnetic pulse weapons and consciousness-altering technologies at the site. Though the official records claimed these experiments had been discontinued, Morrison found evidence suggesting that some form of monitoring equipment might still be active in the area. The possibility that Elena had stumbled into an area of ongoing military testing provided a mundane but chilling explanation for her disappearance. If she had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, accidentally witnessing or being affected by classified experiments, her case might have been deliberately covered up. The burned paintings could have been evidence that someone had tried to destroy proof of whatever Elena had seen. Morrison reached out to contacts in federal law enforcement, trying to determine if there was any truth to her theory about military involvement. The responses she received were evasive and unsatisfying, neither confirming nor denying the possibility. Several officials suggested that she focus on more conventional explanations for Elena's disappearance, advice that only strengthened her suspicion that there was more to the case than she had been told. As Morrison pursued this line of investigation, she began to notice that she was being followed. Cars would appear in her rearview mirror during her drives to the desert, always maintaining a careful distance, but never quite disappearing. Her phone began experiencing unusual interference, with calls cutting out at crucial moments and emails disappearing from her computer. When she mentioned these incidents to colleagues, they suggested she was becoming too emotionally invested in the case, that she was seeing conspiracies where none existed. But Morrison's suspicions were confirmed when she received an unexpected visitor at her home one evening. The man introduced himself as Agent David Clark from the Department of Homeland Security. He was polite but firm in his message. The Elena Vasquez case touched on matters of national security, and Morrison's investigation needed to be scaled back immediately. Ms. Vasquez unfortunately encountered something she shouldn't have, Agent Clark explained. Her disappearance is regrettable, but continuing to publicize the case only creates unnecessary security risks. I'm sure you understand the importance of protecting classified operations. Morrison asked directly if Elena was alive, if she was being held somewhere for security reasons. Agent Clark's answer was carefully worded. Miss Vasquez is no longer a threat to operational security. That's all I can tell you. The conversation left Morrison with more questions than answers. Was Elena dead? Or was she being held in some form of protective custody? Had she been silenced because of what she had seen? Or was she alive somewhere, unable to contact her family? The agent's visit seemed to confirm that there was indeed a cover-up, but it provided no clarity about Elena's actual fate. Despite the official pressure to drop the case, Morrison continued her investigation privately. She focused on gathering evidence that could be made public without endangering national security, looking for ways to bring Elena's story to light without revealing classified information. She also began working with Elena's family to keep public pressure on authorities, organizing vigils and media events that would make it difficult for the case to be quietly buried. The investigation took an emotional toll on Morrison, who found herself increasingly isolated as colleagues distanced themselves from her work on the Elena Vasquez case. Her superiors made it clear that her promotion prospects were being affected by her refusal to let the matter drop. But Morrison had seen too much to walk away, had become too invested in finding the truth to abandon Elena's family to their grief and uncertainty. 1 year after the discovery of the burned paintings, Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She took early retirement from the sheriff's department and devoted herself full-time to investigating Elena's disappearance. Using her pension and savings, she hired private investigators and researchers to help piece together the full story of what had happened in the Mojave Desert. The team Morrison assembled included former military personnel familiar with classified weapons programs, geologists who could analyze the unusual mineral deposits at Elena's painting sites, and neuroscientists who could study the consciousness-altering effects of electromagnetic fields. Working together, they began to develop a comprehensive theory about Elena's disappearance that incorporated both the supernatural elements witnesses had reported and the possibility of government involvement. Their investigation revealed that the Mojave Desert had been a testing ground for experimental technologies since the early days of the atomic age. Weapons programs, consciousness research, and exotic physics experiments had all been conducted in the remote areas where Elena had chosen to paint. Many of these programs had created lasting environmental effects, including electromagnetic anomalies that could persist for decades after the original experiments had ended. Elena, with her artistic sensitivity and her repeated exposure to these anomalous areas, had apparently become a living antenna for the strange energies that permeated certain parts of the desert. Her paintings documented not just what she was seeing, but what the desert itself was remembering, echoes of past events and glimpses of possible futures that existed in the electromagnetic memory of the landscape. The team's research suggested that Elena's final trip to the Mojave had been different from her previous visits. Analysis of her last paintings indicated that the electromagnetic phenomena she was encountering had intensified dramatically, possibly due to reactivation of dormant testing equipment or the beginning of new experiments. Elena had found herself in the center of forces beyond her understanding, trying desperately to document what she was experiencing before it was too late. The burned paintings found at Amboy Crater told the story of Elena's final hours. The images showed increasing distortion and chaos, as if reality itself was becoming unstable around her. The geometric burn patterns suggested that the destruction had been caused not by ordinary fire, but by some form of directed energy that had selectively erased certain parts of Elena's visions while leaving others intact. Morrison's team theorized that Elena had been caught in a temporal anomaly caused by the intersection of natural electromagnetic fields and residual effects from military experiments. She might have been displaced in time, existing simultaneously in multiple moments and struggling to maintain her sanity as past, present, and future collapsed around her. The paintings were her attempt to create a record that could survive the chaos, to leave evidence of what she had experienced for others to find. But the team's investigation also uncovered evidence that Elena's disappearance had not been entirely accidental. Government monitoring stations in the desert had detected the unusual activity that accompanied Elena's final painting session. Rather than intervening to help her, officials had made the decision to let events unfold, treating Elena's experience as an unplanned experiment in the effects of temporal displacement on human consciousness. The cover-up that followed had been designed not just to hide military secrets, but to prevent public panic about the unstable nature of reality in certain parts of the American Southwest. Elena's fate had been deemed an acceptable sacrifice to maintain operational security and public ignorance of the government's ongoing experiments with time and consciousness. Morrison's findings were compiled into a comprehensive report that she planned to release to the media, despite the personal and professional risks involved. But before she could make the information public, she received a final visit from Agent Clark. This time, his message was accompanied by a briefcase containing photographs and documents that made Morrison reconsider her plans. The materials showed Elena, alive but fundamentally changed, living in a secure facility where she was being cared for by medical professionals. The woman in the photographs was recognizably Elena Vasquez, but she appeared to exist in a state of temporal flux, aging and growing younger in cycles that followed no natural pattern. Sometimes she appeared as the 29-year-old artist who had disappeared in 2016. Sometimes she looked decades older, with white hair and deep lines around her eyes. Sometimes she appeared as a child, painting with the same intensity but expressing visions that belonged to no earthly experience. "She's not dead," Agent Clark explained, "but she's not exactly alive in any way her family would recognize. The temporal displacement was permanent. She exists now in all moments simultaneously, experiencing her entire timeline as a single eternal present. We're keeping her comfortable and allowing her to continue painting, but she can never return to normal time." The photographs of Elena's new paintings were the most disturbing part of the briefcase. They showed scenes from throughout human history, mixed with images of possible futures and alternate realities. Some depicted recognizable historical events with impossible accuracy, as if Elena was witnessing them firsthand. Others showed futures that might never come to pass, worlds where humanity had taken different paths and made different choices. "She's become something like a human time machine," Agent Clark continued. "Her consciousness exists outside normal temporal flow, which means she can observe and record events from any point in history. We're learning things from her paintings that we never could have discovered through conventional research, but she can never be allowed to return to public life. The knowledge she possesses, the things she's seen, it would shatter people's understanding of reality." Morrison was faced with an impossible choice. She could expose the truth about Elena's disappearance and force the government to acknowledge what had happened, but doing so would likely result in Elena's death as officials moved to eliminate the security threat she represented. Or she could accept the cover-up and allow Elena's family to continue believing she was simply missing, while their daughter existed in a form of temporal prison that was both miraculous and horrifying. The detective chose a middle path that satisfied neither justice nor mercy, but offered the best chance of keeping Elena alive. She agreed to limit her investigation and public statements in exchange for regular proof that Elena was being well cared for. She would receive photographs and reports every 6 months showing that Elena was physically healthy and allowed to continue her artistic work. In return, Morrison would tell Elena's family that the investigation had reached a dead end, that there was no evidence to suggest their daughter was anything other than missing. The arrangement left Morrison with a burden of knowledge that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She had found Elena Vasquez, but she could never reunite her with her family. She had uncovered the truth about the government's experiments in the Mojave Desert, but she could never expose them publicly. She had solved one of the most mysterious disappearances in California history, but the solution could never be shared. Elena's family continued their annual trips to the Mojave, still leaving flowers at the spot where her easel had been found. They never learned that their daughter was alive in a facility hundreds of miles away, painting visions of every moment that had ever existed or ever would exist. They never knew that Elena could see them during their memorial visits, that she painted their grief and their hope with the same temporal clarity that allowed her to witness the birth and death of stars. Morrison retired completely from investigative work, but she continued to receive the promised updates about Elena's condition. The photographs showed a woman who existed outside the normal flow of aging and death, sometimes appearing exactly as she had on the day she disappeared, sometimes looking centuries old with wisdom and sorrow that no human should have to bear. The paintings continued to evolve, becoming more complex and incomprehensible as Elena's temporal consciousness expanded to encompass ever greater spans of time and space. The burned paintings found at Amboy Crater were quietly transferred to a classified government facility where they were studied by teams of scientists and mystics working to understand the nature of time itself. The desert sites where Elena had painted were discreetly cordoned off, disguised as wildlife preservation areas while actually serving as monitoring stations for temporal anomalies. Future artists and hikers would be subtly discouraged from visiting these locations, protecting them from Elena's fate, while preventing interference with ongoing experiments. The official record of Elena Vasquez's disappearance remains open, classified as a cold case with no active leads. Her family has never stopped hoping for her return, organizing search parties and maintaining a website where people can report possible sightings. They don't know that Elena sees their efforts, that she paints their enduring love with the same impossible clarity that allows her to observe the formation of galaxies and the last breath of dying worlds. In her temporal prison, Elena continues to paint, creating works that document the entire history of existence while remaining trapped in a single moment that extends forever. She has become both the ultimate artist and the ultimate tragedy, a woman who can see everything but can touch nothing, who knows all of time but can never return to the simple human moment when she loaded her van with art supplies and drove into the desert to capture the beauty of a dying day. The Mojave Desert keeps its secrets, as it always has. Travelers who pass through the area sometimes report strange lights in the distance, or the sound of someone humming while they work. But these phenomena are dismissed as desert mirages and wishful thinking, just another part of the mystery that surrounds one of America's most beautiful and dangerous landscapes. And somewhere in a facility that doesn't officially exist, Elena Vasquez continues to paint the impossible, her brush moving across canvases that capture moments from the beginning of time to the end of existence, creating art that no one but her government caretakers will ever see, documenting visions that would drive ordinary minds to madness. The burned canvases found 8 years after her disappearance were only the beginning of Elena's story, fragments of a much larger truth that reveals the fragile nature of time and consciousness. They serve as a warning about the dangers that lie hidden in the American Southwest, about the price of looking too deeply into mysteries that were meant to remain unsolved. For Detective Morrison, now living in quiet retirement, the case of Elena Vasquez represents both her greatest success and her most painful failure. She found the missing artist, but she could never bring her home. She uncovered the truth, but she could never share it. She solved the mystery, but the solution only deepened the tragedy. Elena Vasquez vanished into the Mojave Desert in March 2016, and in many ways she's still there, painting in the spaces between moments, creating art that captures the eternal now that exists outside the normal flow of time. Her story serves as a reminder that some places in the world are too dangerous for human understanding, and that the pursuit of artistic truth can lead to discoveries that change the very nature of existence itself. The desert remembers everything, and Elena Vasquez has become part of that memory, a human consciousness trapped in the electromagnetic web that connects all moments across time and space. She is both missing and found, both lost and eternal, both human and something far beyond human understanding. Her burned canvases tell only part of the story, the part that can be safely revealed to a world that isn't ready for the full truth about time, consciousness, and the hidden experiments that continue in the remote corners of the American Southwest. But for those who know where to look and what to listen for, Elena's story continues to unfold in the wind that blows across the Mojave, in the strange lights that dance among the Joshua trees, and in the whispered warnings that drift across the desert on star-filled nights. The mystery of Elena Vasquez will never be officially solved, because the truth is too dangerous to reveal and too precious to destroy. She has become part of the desert's collection of secrets, another ghost story for travelers to tell around their campfires, another warning about the price of looking too deeply into the heart of the American wilderness. In the end, Elena got what she always wanted, to become one with the landscape she loved, to exist forever in the spaces between moments where art and reality merge into something beyond human comprehension. But the cost of that transformation was everything that made her human, everything that connected her to the world of ordinary time and mortal love. The Mojave Desert stretches endlessly under the scorching sun, keeping its secrets safe in the silence between the sand and the sky, where a young artist continues to paint visions that span all of time and space, creating masterpieces that will never be seen by the world she left behind.